For 40 years, I've walked the line between worlds and am well versed in death. But I want to have faith in humans. Give me something to believe in. Earth below me, sky above me, fire within me. Brought to you by UPRN Network. I'm Trish Mo, and this is The Missing Piece. Good evening. I'm Trish. This is The Missing Piece, and we are broadcasting live from New Orleans, 105.3 FM and United Public Radio Network. I also want to thank Carnation for this hour, for sponsoring this hour, as well as all of our listeners who continually support us. That's how we keep going. I also want to give a shout out tonight. Big shout out, Rock Chalk, Jayhawks. Obviously, I am a KU fan. I went to the University of Kansas, 20 years ago now. And they are playing in New Orleans tonight in about half an hour in the championship game against North Carolina. So good luck to the Jayhawks. Tonight, it is my pleasure, and I am so honored to have Jill Weaver on the show. She is, crazy story how we met, but we'll get into that. She spent about 20 years in the biomedical research laboratory field, as well as former chief investigator for MUFON and a paranormal team leader. She also does many she travels solo as an investigator to different historical haunted places and weird places. We have a lot in common, and I would welcome her to the show now. Jill.
Trish.
Oh. Hey, welcome. I'm so
Thank
happy
you.
you're here. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you. I was so excited that you invited me.
Yes, can you hear me okay? I feel like I'm echoing.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. I'm glad we finally got everything to work after a few technical.
The technology is a little tricky sometimes.
It's crazy. Well, welcome. And Jill, just give everyone kind of a little background on yourself. How you got to the paranormal field.
It's kind of a lot. I was kind of going over my resume, and it's just kind of all over the place. I tell people all the different things I've done, and they say, "Wow, that's kind of eclectic." And so kind of what I said I wanted to talk about tonight is just call it sort of pulling threads. We all have these threads through our lives, and sometimes you don't see them for 10, 20, 30, could even be 50 years until you see that one little similarity that just keeps popping up and popping up. And at least that's kind of how I look at my life. I started out being a tomboy and being a kid and, playing outside. I grew up very rurally, as I believe you did as well. Just really felt a bond with earth and animals, just, assumed that everyone was like that. And that was just a normal part of childhood. I really cared about nature, and I was very curious, and I wanted to learn more about it. So I actually ended up getting a bachelor's of biology degree from State University of New York. And it was a difficult time because a lot of people, were into environmental, activities and trying to really protect the environment and starting to understand that we were starting to damage our environment, but there was no money there. It was really, really difficult to get any kind of a job in any sort of environmental field or wildlife field. I mean, I guess you could become like a park ranger, but other than that, it was, these programs are mostly grant based, and the money was very few and far between. So I ended up going into more of the biomedical research part of it. I graduated with a biology, but my concentration was in chemistry and medical technology. And I was one of the first of the class where they started actually awarding degrees in recombinant gene technology. So I was doing some of the original, we talk about gene splicing and all that. I mean, I think they teach it in kindergarten now. but at the time that was very cutting edge, and there were jobs in that, so I did go into the biomedical field. It's just basic biological research. Probably the last part of my career, I studied systems related to diabetes. So that was sort of my formal schooling. But through all that, I still maintained this deep connection to the earth. My grandparents were florists. They had a nursery. Everybody was, into gardening. My mother was just an amazing gardener and landscaper and all that. So as I progressed through my education, I started seeing sort of it was a dichotomy between, the hard science that I believe in, that I understand, yet I started having mystical and kind of strange experiences. And it was more about how to pull those things together and try to have both of those exist in your mind at the same time. And I got ill, and although I would be like teaching, medical students, and I was working as part of a medical school, you kind of get to this place where Western medicine can only do so much. And then I started doing some research, and this stuff it's not woo woo. It was probably considered kind of woo woo at the time, but I think science is starting to come around, and I learned Reiki. And that is a really, really great healing modality, both for yourself and for others. And I
Yeah.
understand now. I mean, there's several hospitals that allow Reiki masters to come in
Hmm.
and work on pain relief, and I'm starting to actually see some of the scientific experiments be done. I think Popular Mechanics had an article just last week. They're starting to understand. They're starting to actually see that you can influence cell growth just by laying your hands on some cell culture and things. So things like that are very interesting to me. I've always said that a lot of metaphysics is very, very similar to cutting edge physics. I mean, when we start talking
Hmm.
about spooky action and things at a distance and quantum entanglements and all this, if you're sitting there and you're you're in a yoga position and you're in India, people say, well, yeah, that's just that, that's just that religion, or you're just kind of crazy. But when it's coming out of the mouth of a scientist in a huge lecture hall, I think people sort of pay more
Everybody
attention
starts
to it.
listening, right?
So yeah, that's kind of the dichotomy there. And yeah, so I jumped around. I did science for 20 years, and then that was just not sort of a compatible lifestyle to having a child. So I had my son, and I got out of science, and so then that kind of gave me the possibility to sort of look into other things that I was interested in, and maybe do some other exploring. And I started. I'd always loved antiques and collectibles and things like that. I know you and I kind of talked about that, because they always have just sort of a certain energy, and they call
Yes.
out to you. So I started monkeying around as an antique dealer and selling on eBay when I was home. That was like the best job ever, especially when you have like a very, very small child and you have to be home, and you
Hmm.
have 3 o'clock feedings, and you have just kind of all the chaos that go with children. It was just really nice. When my son got a little older, he was like actually going to auctions with me, and we'd
Oh,
make our
that's
our we'd make our little pilgrimage to the post office every day, and so he really and he sells on Etsy now every once in a while, so he knows that that's like a really good sort of. It was like the start of the gig economy type thing. And then as I started doing that, I got into more and more of the helping people aspect of it, more of the clearing, more of the cleaning, running into hoarders. So I became a professional organizer. And the name of my business is Tidy Soul. And I started feeling that there was a connection between that and Reiki. When you walk into a space, some spaces just don't feel good. Sometimes
hmm
they are cluttered, sometimes they're dirty. And then also, as a paranormal investigator, I used to go into places and I'd be like, this place is haunted, but there's other stuff here. There's either ick that brought
hmm
in ick, or the whatever came in like left ick. So it was never like, you just have to help these spirits move on. It's a lot of things. It's like you've got to clear the clutter, both in your life and in your home. You've got to cleanse, a lot of things that are in the pagan tradition, where you wash your walls and, you leave lemons in the corners and you put out salt. It's a spiritual house cleaning, but it also is a literal house cleaning. And I
Yes.
think that's just really important for people to be able to function properly. And then if you're an intuitive or if you're empathic, you're really cluttering your field and kind of glumming up your mind and your bandwidth with all this other energy and all this other
Mhm.
stuff. So I started seeing, those connections there between just what people's homes were like. I got my real estate license, and then I really started having paranormal experiences, just getting into so many houses and just seeing and feeling so many different energies. There was one house, I actually showed it 4 times because we were like starting to go back. It's like I showed it with my clients, and they were very interested in the whole paranormal. And then pretty soon I told some other people, and the poor agent, he was like, are you really going to try to sell my house? Because, you've been there 4 times. And I was like, I couldn't tell him. I really felt it was haunted. It was a great house. It wasn't anything scary. It wasn't anything negative, but I mean, it was his mother-in-law. She was so attached to the house. She just absolutely loved it. Um, and in real estate, there's sort of well, at least it goes by state, but in Indiana, you must disclose that someone passed in the house if you're directly asked. And so finally,
Really?
yes, it depends on state by state by state.
Yeah, I knew that.
But in
I know.
Indiana, unless you are directly asked, you don't have to disclose it. And
Mhm.
so finally, the listing agent, it was his mother-in-law's house. And I specifically asked him because I found a newspaper article that she had passed in the house, and he was really quiet and he didn't want to say it. And then finally he said, yes, she passed in the house. And I said, well, it's a beautiful house. And then the next time we went back, we were trying to explain to her what was going on so that, she could move on and realize that, yes, there would be a lot of people like coming in her house. And ultimately, she would get some new residents in there. But so I thought that was kind of funny. And then, word spread around my real estate office that, I was into all these spooky things and into ghost hunting, and just the stories that I got. I had so many agents, they would say, can we leave the office? Can we go have a cup of coffee? I got to tell you a ghost story. So
It's funny how people start opening up just by you know,
yeah, they
when
wanted
they
to, but it's like,
yeah,
don't really tell anybody else that I told you a
right.
story, but I have a story for you. And so I actually do sort of have a little database of addresses in Indiana that people have had experiences.
Wow.
In some places, I've kind of checked in and they'll say, no, 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 never, nothing ever happened again. So
So, do you think what's your opinion on that? Do you think it should be disclosed or um that should be left up to the owner, I guess?
my personal opinion, I feel that if it was like a murder, suicide, I think of violence or extreme sort of like suicide, despair, I think that should be disclosed.
Yes.
I really feel like it should. Just to be fair, there was a huge lawsuit that happened down in Florida over in Orlando at Church Street Station, which was it's it used to be a train station. They converted it. It was really, it's probably still there. It's a really cool kind of nightlife venue with different bars and different activities. And it is supposedly haunted, and the new owners were not told. And they're Asian, and they got
Oh, I think I saw that.
very upset, and there was a
Mhm.
lawsuit. I haven't seen if that's gone through the court system or not, which is understandable.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, I learned on, very quickly in real estate, you do have to take buyers, preferences and religions and views like that.
Mhm.
You get requests for, my front door has to face east, or it has to face, a certain
Mhm.
direction, or, I don't want to live next to a cemetery, or, please don't give me a place haunted. So it sort of became sort of a joke sometimes with some of my buyers, particularly the younger ones. I'd say, I'm a ghost hunter. How do you feel about that? And some people, they would laugh, and then other people would say, okay, just please, can you make sure my house isn't haunted? I'll say, okay, we'll check. And one guy even wanted me to make sure I checked the whole backyard, that there weren't any pets buried back there, because he really.
Oh, wow.
So
Well,
so people can feel very strongly about it. I think it's really important to.
I think, and before I really embraced, communicating with spirits and stuff like that, I didn't realize I was being drawn to haunted houses and some of the very negative, haunted by negative entities, and I didn't even realize it, and it could have been essentially really dangerous actually for my family. The last house I lived in, actually both houses I lived in New York because it has so much history there, but one had 9 stabbings throughout history
Oh
in different
my.
eras because it was a boarding house in the early 1700s, 1800s. But my friends wouldn't even come, even I eventually I had to move right across the street just to
Wow.
get out of that out of that house. So yes, absolutely. Things like that are I think are should be disclosed.
Yeah, I think it's good, and I think, I mean, I talked to even some, very very seasoned real estate agents about it. People who are pretty high up in the company, and they sort of took that tact of addressing it with a little bit of humor, but a little bit of factual. Because
Mhm.
I had asked this one manager, and she said, "Well, if you believe in those sorts of things, yes, the rocking chair used to rock itself." So she'd always kind of start with a little disclaimer. And that was kind of a way to feel people out. And if people were uncomfortable, then yes, you definitely would, say that that was not the property for them. But at least in Indiana, when I was practicing, those all sort of fall under, the buyer has to do their due diligence, and you put that on the buyer. I mean, if there's a rapist across the street, that's on the buyer. So I think everyone just kind of that's your little public service message, is we all have to sort of fend for ourselves,
Mhm.
and and sort of check those things out. But it can be actually very serious in terms of lawsuits, like I was telling you about Church Street Station. But we got called to do an investigation, and I was a practicing realtor, and the leader of the team, she said, she gave me the address, and I said, she's like, "Are you coming?" And I said, "Let me go run the address." She goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I'm going to run it through the database to make sure that that property isn't up for sale." And she's like, "Why do you have to do that?" I said, "I'm a realtor. That means that not only am I licensed to sell real estate, but I have a board of ethics that I must report to. I have agreed to certain ethical practices." And she couldn't understand why that applied. And I said, "Let me put it this way." I said, "People talk, your neighbors are going to talk." I said, "If we all show up carrying all our equipment in and out of this house to do
Mhm.
this investigation, you don't think that the neighbors are going to run and tell the next, the next person that comes in, or the potential buyers?" And I said, "And somebody is going to be either upset, or somebody's going to get sued, and I don't want any part of that. I can't go in a house that's under contract with another agent without their express permission. It's just not board of ethics." So I declined that investigation, and I think that was kind of spirit intervening. It didn't go well, so I'm glad I stayed home.
I even remember a time my next door neighbor was murdered when I was younger, and the people who moved in next um it was just a mom and a teenage girl, and she ended up eh, they kept having accidents, weird accidents in the house, and then the teenage girl, and I was very, I was probably like 9 years old, so I didn't understand a lot of it, but now in hindsight I'm thinking back, I'm like, wow, actually that probably makes sense that she started harming herself as well, but
Oh
and her mom's
dear.
like, "I don't know what to do, like, this isn't like her, this never," and now come to think, now I'm thinking back because it was a brutal murder. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible murder, and, but now thinking back, there's things like that could happen too, as
Oh,
far
good
as
heavens! Yeah, if you're talking about, yeah, and you have young
how
children.
that negative
Oh,
energy would influence the residents, because they rented it out afterwards, so
that's the other way I found a lot of haunted houses. I
That
got
were
started.
rentals?
Yes, they became
Mhm.
rentals, and this I started in real estate in 2007, and that was the kind of the start of the whole foreclosure debacle. And Indiana was hit really, really hard with it. And so, anybody who, if you didn't pay your mortgage because you've lost your job or whatever was
Mhm.
going on, your house goes into foreclosure. And that is a really long legal process, and houses don't fare very well because, they'd be vacant for, maybe 2 years almost during that whole process. And, vermin would move in, squatters would move in, bad things would happen, which would sort of further stigmatize, just make the property very, just a lot of negative activity. And so those houses eventually would end up in the hands of investors, and investors would,
Mhm.
get a group of them, and then they'd like rehab them, and then they'd rent them out. So some of the scariest stories I heard were from renters, people that were renting this house. And then, like if the previous tenants moved out, they would just say, well, the previous tenants, they were losers, blah, blah, blah. They were only here for 3 months and they bolted on me. They trashed the place and they left. Well, that's not always the whole full story. I mean, they could have been tormented, and, you can't, couldn't get out of their lease, couldn't afford to get out of their lease or whatever. And their family was being impacted. So they just fled. And then they would just turn around and rent that house to someone
Run
else.
it out, yeah. And I'm sure I know that's another problem in at least in the US now since with COVID and the shutdowns and everything, there are investors just buying up houses everywhere. So,
Mhm.
there's more and more rentals
And
and
housing is really tight now. So, I mean, people will
mhm.
live wherever you can get in. So, I would kind of expect more of that to happen. Stigmatized is the word I was grasping for. In real estate, it's considered stigmatized if any untoward events had happened there.
Well, and aside from events that have happened at a place, then you have to go back and you have to think about the land itself where houses are positioned. Obviously, I'm my native background. I That's something that's like the first thing I always consider, and then I have this conversation a lot with people about the house itself being having an energy, and it makes me think of witches. That people always think of witches and the infamous house with chicken legs. It's but it's kind of true. It's kind of like we're very because and it's not like that goes kind of into your discussion topic tonight as far as that's what I was thinking as far as houses. I always think of people as houses, and
Mhm.
in the same way, like my own house, I'm like everything. No, especially as an artist and stuff, when people craft things, you put your energy into it, no matter what it is. And so the bricks, the very wood that makes it, things like that. So do
There
you
was
think
actually, yeah, there was actually a haunted commercial building in my former town. And there wasn't anything, nobody, everyone was doing research. You couldn't figure out, it wasn't the land, nothing that they could find any record of. But they think some of the major timbers that had been used had come from
mhm.
a farmhouse, and that had had something horrible happen, and that energy was attached to there. And
Yes.
then it was manifesting because there was a little girl that used to manifest in this bar. Like the bartender would see her, 3 o'clock in the morning. They'd be closing up, and they would turn a corner, and she would be there.
Now, do you think I was thinking about I had this thought the other day because I mean it obviously I've communicated with trees before, which is weird to some people, but um I had this crazy camping experience once that I thought that this person had taken their life at this tree, but it ended up being the first hanging tree in Kansas, like the
Oh.
legal place. So there were tons of people hung at that tree. And can you imagine? Okay, well, there's so many things with that. Going back to the tree itself, like, can you imagine the way the tree feels? Like it was used to kill people, even though it wasn't the one choosing to kill people. But can you? So then I went further. I was like, okay, but then if that tree is used to build a house, that's or anything, furniture, whatever, paper, a pencil to write with. Um, how much do you think things like that affect l- literally everything it touches?
I believe that it affects everything. Really, what you're talking about is the basic principles of sympathetic magic. Because in sympathetic magic, the representation of a thing is the thing. And like you
Right.
said, if you're going to eat your cereal out of a bowl, if you've had a bowl that was handmade by somebody who, is an artist and they're doing it as a labor of love, that energy, I mean, we know from other studies that those emotions, they do have a certain energy. They impart it. I
Mhm.
mean, people who are sensitive enough that, can hold an item and see its past, they can sense that energy. So you would want to eat out of a bowl that somebody, did in a loving way instead of maybe something that was just, machine made in a factory. And I am not a vegetarian, but I'm very vegetarian. I totally get it because, you're putting
Mhm.
food in your body. And if that food has been treated, with hate or just scorn or, and then animals experienced fear, you're putting that all into your body. And it kind of makes me wonder, we see so much anxiety, particularly in younger people in
Mhm.
society, and it's like there's so much factory farmed food, and
Oh, yeah.
you know and it's just, you just don't know what those animals have gone through. And
Yeah.
maybe it's just maybe a little thing, but maybe these things are cumulative, and it's just cumulative of so much other, just sort of hate and, other negative emotions that people just throw around on other people on a daily basis.
And it's a lot of people here in Kansas anyways don't think of it as far, well, that's not true. A lot of us if we have a lot of people I know that still eat beef and stuff. I do myself, but many times we get it from a neighboring farmer, someone that we know personally that has grass-fed beef that
Mhm.
we know raises them humane. They don't go to this giant slaughterhouse, things like that. So that does change it a little bit. But on the other hand, people argue that point with me that it changes the meat and stuff, and I'm like, but as hunters that we have here, they won't eat a deer that's killed, um, on the highway or something, like by a car because they think the adrenaline taints the meat. And I'm
Mhm.
like, so what's different?
Mhm.
but but apparently that doesn't connect. So it's like,
Well, and I can tell you, speaking as a scientist, speaking as a biologist, I worked in an endocrinology lab, and I'm still atoning for my atrocities against laboratory animals, but it
oh
was in the
gosh,
sake of trying to improve humans' lives. But
yes.
we started seeing seasonal. We could see the hormonal differences that were coming out of these pituitaries of these rats that we're making tissue culture out of, and we would trace it back, and it turned out to be it was tied to the commodities market, because when beef prices went down, more animals were sent to slaughter. And when the
Mhm.
animals were sent to slaughter, because the prices were lower, they would use more of the organ meat. So as soon as you're using more organ meats, you have more female cows, and you're getting more like uterine tissue and ovaries. And it was actually spiking the estrogen levels in the feed that was produced for our rats that we used in experiments. So
Hmm.
we could actually see the
Interesting.
link. I mean, because these assays are incredibly sensitive. And we'd say,
Mhm.
why are our rats just, their estrogen is just off the charts, last month? And it'd be like, oh, okay, that was linked to the feed prices. So you get differences like that are actually just part of commodities. Just depends on which organs they use, and they use all parts of the cow. So
And I know, I'm not as familiar. I know in certain places they also start legalizing the use of like horse meat, um, especially. And this all came about when I was riding a horse recently, actually, that used to be a racehorse. And again, I'm like, just I always imagine this whole spiral of the horse's life being a champion, and treated so great, and then all of a sudden it's like when people retire and stuff and they just think they have no purpose and nothing, and
Hmm.
then they're just going to go be sent off to like a glue factory or something. And
Hmm.
it's and it and that's the reality of it. That's
Hmm. That's true.
And so I think the same of these haunted houses, going back to that. They're in their prime when they're built. They're these big, beautiful, mansions, Victorian mansions, or you know, goth era things like that. And then all of a sudden, when they're abandoned or owned by an investor, they don't have a family to love them anymore. They
Hmm.
don't have, somebody to take care of them. And that's when everything starts. Their roof starts caving in, things like that, and then it's just people abuse the property, and it's sad if you think, and that's actually the whole, as above so below thing, because it's
Yeah, and it was always amazing to me how quickly houses went downhill when they were
mm-hmm.
abandoned. I mean,
Yep.
it happens really quickly, and it just kind of didn't really seem tied. I mean, just because someone's living in a house doesn't mean they're out painting, they're out necessarily doing maintenance every day. But I used to tell all my people that's like houses just are not meant to be empty. They're meant to be lived in. They're meant to be loved. They're meant to be cared for.
I just saw an orb fly behind you. That's cool.
Oh yeah.
It's really bright. um so and coming from New Mexico, I don't know if you've ever been there. um
I have not.
to
I have not spent very much time out west. I just briefly skirted through Arizona. I was out there in January. I went to the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. And then I'd planned to spend more time out there. And we had that really bad storm that was coming through. And it looked like, unless I made it east, I was going to get out there probably for a whole nother week until the roads opened back up. So I ended up coming back.
There's so many. It's such a magical place in a lot of parts, and so historical and beautiful in a lot of places. But Santa Fe, well, actually a lot of the state, with I have a Navajo background, and in the Navajo customs, they have these beautiful weavers that make rugs and blankets, and it's actually the cross symbol that was a spirit called Spider Woman. The actual that's where that came from. That was a
Mhm.
representation of
Mama
Spider.
Arachnid. Hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that, and don't realize why they don't. A lot, for the most part, in their older customs, you would never see it surrounded by like a diamond or a box or anything, because she didn't like to be boxed in
Hmm.
and or trapped or feel trapped in any way. And I was thinking of the rugs and the blankets and the weaving, and what was fascinating. Even, I mean, up until the late 1800s, early 1900s, many of those native women didn't know, weren't formally educated, couldn't read, could not, a lot of things like that. But the intricacy of the history that was passed down in these blankets and rugs and stuff that they would weave the stories into is absolutely fascinating. And that reminds me of any type of handmade, it's just like people, settlers that used to make the handmade trunks and things, and each generation would add to it, or carve into it or something like that. um and so I was thinking about these haunted houses and such. We were talking about the antiques and how you have to kind of the different separate the different layers
Hmm.
of their history. Oh, my cat decided to
Oh, hi,
wanted to
Katie.
join us.
Well, it's really it. Let me just go back to what you were saying about Spider Woman. That's actually very intuitive of you, because I have been told that I have a few elements of spider magic.
Yes.
In
That's
that
why I say that.
weaving, yeah, and and hence my last name. It's yeah, it's about weaving these things and just just, and like I said, seeing the threads, following the threads, weaving them together, and just kind of
Mm-hmm.
seeing what you have woven. Now, I spent a lot of time in Egypt, and Egypt, of
Oh,
course, is
wow.
also known for their incredible, beautiful weavings and rugs and tapestries.
Mm-hmm.
And in the weavers there, in the Islamic tradition, they always make one mistake. They will
Mm-hmm.
deliberately misweave just one thread, and because they're not perfect. Only Allah is perfect, and they'll show that in their work. And just that one little mistake is their way of humbling and showing that they are devout, and they realize that they're not better than the gods, because that's what that.
Navajo as well. They put actually a different color. It'll usually be a bright color, one
Oh, okay.
thread that actually will start in the very beginning of the design or the rug or tapestry
Hmm.
or whatever, and it kind of spirals out to the edge, but it's one continuous thread just to show the same kind of the same concept throughout a person's
Hmm.
lifetime or generations in a family, how it kind of all connects, but it's not ever one straight line. It's not ever one pattern, and things like that. But yes, you are very. That's one of the first things I noticed about you. Is kind of. I went. I had the pleasure of going on well, kind of an investigation. I was pretty chaotic when I was there because I was, my scattered personality, but
It was kind of this visit. It was like this visit. Yeah, it
but
was like a
yeah,
visit. Yeah.
at in Atchison. But yes, I think Jill, you're one of those people that kind of helps us. I was talking to to Flood from XP Plans too about we were talking about like puzzles and stuff like that, and how those come together, and we're like we just don't know how to do it all the time, and you're one of those people, especially from like talking to you last night and stuff. You kind of help um connect all of those, connect like a
Yeah,
weaver,
it's
and
arachnid. Yeah.
and as people think I'm crazy, I love spiders. I don't. They're like, "Are you crazy? You're just," especially in Kansas, we have like brown recluses and black widows and everything. And I've been bitten by both, just and I survived. But that was like years ago, before I was more in alignment on probably a better vibration, because they don't bite me now. But I am very, gentle. If I see one, I don't smash it, and I don't let other people smash them. I, just move them. But um I was thinking, also before you came on, I had this dream the other day about Charlotte's Web and the story of that, and just the how the entire um duration of Charlotte's life, she would weave messages into her web, and kind of help everyone in the barn, all the other animals, see a kind of a different better perspective about their lives. And so I think that's
That's funny
amazing too.
because when we had gotten to Sally House, I had just met. I mean, Flood and I had spoken a few times, but I had just met him, and it was either I think it was maybe the second night, and I made some offhanded remark about Spider Woman, and he stopped. He almost fell down the stairs. He goes, "Wait, wait, wait! Stop! What did you just say?" And I said, I'm Spider Woman. Haha. I like not like literally, but and he goes, oh my God. He said, the night before I got here, I dreamt of this huge Huntman spider. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it was probably me. And then I have a friend, and we occasionally share dream sequences. We'll show up in your dream, and she's terrified of spiders. And I
Oh
said, I'm
no.
so sorry. And I said, she goes, well, if I squish you in a dream, like, please forgive me. I'm really terrified of spiders. And, it would be like this instinctive thing. And then a few days after we had that conversation, she said, I was in my dream, and she said, and I looked up and there was a spider and it was way, way up high. She goes, I couldn't reach you to squish you, but I saw that you were there.
Oh, and I literally, well, as far as that goes, I always think of that saying when people are like, if I'm ever in my next life, if I'm a spider, I hope somebody shows me mercy because I don't want to be the one that's just minding my own business and get squished. Um, but spiritually, spiders are a symbol of grounding and stability and security. Um, and they show us the importance of birth, growth, death, um, rebirth, spinning a web of evolution and transformation.
Interesting.
And they represent the beautiful, inspiring part of creativity, but also the need to clean out the cobwebs and keep moving forward. That's perfect for you.
It is. It's all the energy clearing. Yes, it's just clear it
Yes.
all out, and yeah, it can be a real catalyst. Sometimes I've noticed that I can be around people, and sometimes I will help people bring out their best, and then sometimes people will be at their worst. And it was like I just whatever was there just kind of got catalyzed and brought to the surface. And sometimes that's important. You know, you need to sometimes, if you're not aware of your shadow, somebody needs to sort of
Yes.
point your shadow out for you so that you can think, yeah, I got some shadow issues there I need to work on. And it's like any other, clearing clutter. Like when I work with my clients, it's like I got to see it all. Pull it. We're opening up every drawer. We're opening up every closet. You got to pull it all out. We're putting it in a pile and we're going to examine it because just because it's all stuffed away and you're not looking at it, you think it's not hurting you,
Yes.
but it's there and your mind is aware of it, and you have this clutter that can be physical and emotional and spiritual and everything else.
It's funny you say that because when I first started, kind of on the journey to in really getting into my photography business, and because you start seeing a lot about not only um, your own life and family and stuff, but as far as other people as a photographer, because it's like, I mean, it's literally like you're looking at it through different a different set of
Mhm.
eyes because, and so when I started doing that and kind of thinking about a podcast or something, um gosh, it's been um over 2 years now because it was the beginning of the shutdown. But when I started doing that, I made all these videos. Um, and my studio I had this huge, like really open closet that I used because the acoustics were good. It had a really high ceiling and stuff. And I made all these videos in this closet, quite literally, because that's where my office was. But I never released them or anything. And so the other day for Savage, I was like, I'm just gonna put all those on there now because at this point, like I've grown so much since then. But it's funny you say that because like I made all of those in my closet, and it's kind of, metaphorically like that. And yes, that was back when I was coming out of the broom closet as far as like people
Mhm.
you know as far as being a witch and pagan, separating from my church and stuff. That's absolutely during that time. So I was afraid of coming out, coming out,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that whole
bringing all
phrase
that out of the
"skeletons in your
closet.
closet."
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a client. I listed her house, and this was still kind of coming out of the foreclosure. Everybody's home prices were just like so low, and I said, well, why do you want to leave? And she said, I just wanted, like, something new or whatever. And I said, really, financially it might not be the right time to do that. I said, instead of, like, losing money, selling your house and trying to get someplace else, why don't you just try to love your house, try to embrace it, make changes. And my gosh, I mean, like, she took me at my word, because I got a call like a couple of months later, and I came over and she had, like, repainted the whole house. She'd redecorated. It was beautiful. It was her. And at the end of this hall, she had this really, really large linen closet. It was an awesome closet. And she goes, come here. And she opened it up and she had turned it into an office That girl is now a romance novelist, and she had 10 best-selling novels she wrote in
Wow.
this little itty bitty closet
Mhm.
that she carved out her space. And I was like, oh my gosh, she was just so inspiring to me. It's like, you take lemons, you made lemonade, and she carved
Mhm.
out this little space. And she said, this is really important to me, feeling like I needed to write. And now I have a desk. I have this little, sort of under the cupboard, kind of little cupboard under the stairs kind of place. And that became like her little magical transformation TARDIS that she just went in and started writing, and amazing things came out of it.
Maybe that's why I should go. Do you go back to the closet and start
She felt
start
she felt she
writing?
felt safe there.
Yes,
She felt
yes.
safe
That's
there.
that's another thing. Flood always tells me I need to journal and stuff and see what comes from it. And I'm like, I don't know, but yeah, I did used to write in there before, and it wasn't like I said. This is a huge closet. Like I made it
Mhm.
really nice. It's not like it's not like picturing some like under the stairs thing or anything, but it was my little space and you know but some crazy, actually I go back looking at these videos and I learn from them now, so um that's another
Well,
thing.
and from a feng shui standpoint, that could be the center. That could literally could be the heart of your home.
Mhm.
In feng shui, the center of your home should be like a living space. It should be something like that. And unfortunately, for a lot of American homes, it's like usually the bathroom, which is like the worst
Yeah.
feng shui. But yeah, maybe like a closet like that. You actually like are in the heart of the home. I used to have this huge, huge master closet, and I just loved it. Like I made it into like a little
Mhm.
meditation space, and you could close the door, and it was actually really close to where the furnace was. So it literally kind of was like the heartbeat of the home. That's, the respiration, the breathing of the home. And sometimes that's a really good space to go to, especially
It's
for
crazy.
creativity.
I'll have to send you one of the another video I did was a cooking video for stuffed apples actually, and I was talking about the kitchen being the heart of the home, but that kitchen is right, like one of the walls is to that closet, so it's warm and everything as well, and inviting. And I always have good energy. I mean, most people do in their kitchen as well
Mhm.
as their bedroom or whatever. So that makes sense.
Oh, well, you could.
That's
I mean,
interesting.
you could be a kitchen witch, and just not even realize it.
Oh my gosh! I wish
You're
I could
probably
show
a
you.
kitchen.
There's
You're
a
probably a kitchen.
spider crawling down my wall right now. Like it's on the other side of the computer,
It just
otherwise
showed
I
up.
could
Yeah.
show. Yeah, that's so cool. I haven't seen, since it's been winter, I haven't seen one in a
Hmm.
while. But
You're getting ready.
ironically, the night I talked to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, of
That's
course.
amazing.
But yeah, yeah, you may be a kitchen witch, and
I do a lot of I have to stay, which is interesting now. Going back to science of things, I have heard so many times. It seems like just in the last year, scientists are saying, "Oh yeah, come to think of it, it seems like the universe operates on magic, and maybe we should have paid attention to all of these symbols and things
mhm.
all along, and blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Thank you." you know finally. But also it's good that everything's kind of it's so much more productive to all of us, to both scientists and people of magic alike, because it absolutely is. And so people always ask me what kind of witch I am, what kind of, and I'm like, well, even before I technically chose that path as far as paganism or as a witch, I was intuitively going through, like, literally I would kind of master cooking and stuff.
Mhm.
I was um ran restaurants and did like cake decorating and all this other stuff long before I ever chose this path. And then I would go into like sewing, and make giant quilts and stuff. And then I would do like go into this whole herbal certifications and
Mhm.
get, gardening. So I was actually going through all these paths of the different elements before I ever realized what I was doing. So intuitively, it's obviously in my blood, but
Yeah,
um,
I think a lot of people are witches and they just haven't tumbled to the fact. I mean,
right.
it took me a long time to realize. I mean, I've been a witch my whole life. I just realized it, and
Mhm.
I mean, and even my grandmother. I mean, she was an incredibly devout Baptist, but being in the nursery and in the gardening, I mean, she always knew the phase of the moon. She knew the right time to plant. She was a very successful
Mhm.
gardener. So she was working, with the phases of the moon. She was working with the soil and, following animals. And I mean, she taught me how to track. She would always be out in the woods, and she just taught me how to just really be mindful and just notice. And she knew all of her mushrooms. She always had all kinds of edible wild things that she was bringing home. And that to me is a definition of a witch. It's just you have that connection with nature, and whether you realize it or not. But it served her very well, but she would never ever have called herself that.
Right. And understandably so, it's had such even to this day. I was just talking about that. I on Chasing Prophecy last week, I had looked up for whatever reason the definition of a witch in online, and all of them that came up from like Webster Dictionary, the Merriam, the all of those, the Oxford Dictionary, had very negative definitions and connotations, which is terrible because literally every culture, every religion, every um, you know, you can identify as whatever you want to be nowadays, and that's protected, except w- being a witch, and that's absurd to me. That,
It
and
was
yes,
just they were just wise women. It's just about being wise
right.
and cunning, and knowing how to use herbs and knowing how to heal and how to help. And that is very
Hmm.
threatening sometimes to the status quo.
Absolutely. And y- that goes especially along with haunted houses and stuff. There's it's another one of those things, kind of like spiders, that people just don't understand, or snakes, or anything. Um,
That's a
I
good
have this
analogy. People
conversation with people
people
all the
fear what
time.
they don't understand. That's
Absolutely. And the same thing with spirits. People think
mhm.
that just all ghosts or demons or all, all these things, and it's not, or that, like, all redheads are evil. I'm like, well, I mean, I'm getting there, but that's because I wasn't born that way. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, um, but it's one of those things that it, uh, back in historically in history, a lot of the plants and a lot of the things that witches did were named specific things, yes, to protect them, or just for by common sense. I was telling somebody the
Mhm.
other day about, like, we came across a lamb's ear. And so if you read that in a book and you
Mhm.
think, "Oh my gosh, these witches, like, they cut off a
Cut the
lamb's ear and they used it in this," you know what? No. Come on now. Like,
No,
most
I have
any of them
never
I know won't hurt a fly for that matter.
right.
Like, and it's a plant that resembles a lamb's ear, and most of those things are plants. But when it's taken literally
Mhm.
to the point of injuring people or animals or things like that, it's kind of like the same thing with, like, the Church of Satan. That I know plenty of people that are great people that belong to the Church of Satan, and
Mhm.
it's not the whole sacrificing people and babies and everything else that most people think it is, you know. So I hope to collectively we can, now that it's more accepted, educate people better on the things that are different than what we know, I guess. And I
I
think
mean,
that's important.
that's what one of the less we talked about, just how wise our children are and how much we learn from them.
Mhm.
And I have a trans son, and he always said, if there's something you don't understand about somebody, just politely ask.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
politely ask, with any kind of sensitivity training. If you don't
Mhm.
understand, don't assume. Just ask. And most people, if you're approached in a loving way, just say, I'm ignorant, I'm curious, like, just please explain it to me, or just tell me about yourself, and they will. And I think we need a lot more of that.
I tell people that all the time, even on this show, because I'm like, you have to think of me like a child, because I pretty much lived under a rock the last 40 years, and I don't know. I literally, I don't watch TV. I don't, I don't know a lot of these things. And it's not playing dumb or being, I
Mhm.
don't know. And I'm the same way. I tell my kids and everybody to, you never know. And unless you walk in someone else's shoes, and that's the beauty of being able to meet people from
Mhm.
all across the country and come together. Like we did in Atchison, we're all from different. We're talking about that. The different. It's amazing to branch out of your comfort zone from
Mhm.
people in your own communities and areas, and have the perspective of somebody who lives, across the U.S. or across the world or wherever they might be.
Oh, I'm a huge proponent of travel. You have to travel. Don't be a tourist, be a traveler. Just really
Yes.
eat the food, talk to people, put yourself in their shoes and just try to understand the world through their perspective as much as you possibly can.
Absolutely. That's such a big and it's so much easier now with the internet,
Mhm.
even though I consider the internet we have a love-hate relationship because I consider it bad as well. But so Jill, where can people find you? Where
I'm
can
on Facebook. I'm Jill Weaver on Facebook. I have a public profile, so go ahead and send me a message and connect with me. I'm on Instagram also as Jill Weaver. I think I'm Jill underscore Weaver.
and I did put those I will link those again and I did link them.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, we are out of time. It has been such a
Awesome.
pleasure
It was
talking
great.
to
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to have you on again.
Oh,
And
I'd love to.
it's I you'll have to go back and watch. There's been a few times that little things have floated past you
I'm not surprised.
behind you. Yeah, it's amazing. So thank you, viewers and listeners. Um, Next week I will have gosh, I'm going to have the host of Horsefly Chronicles on, so you all can catch us there or me on Chasing Prophecy tomorrow. Jill Weaver, I'm going to link her again below. And thank you all for listening. Have a good night.